Welcome, everybody, to the Third and Goal podcast presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm Tyler James, and I'm joined, as always, by the one and only Eric Hansen. Together, we cover Notre Dame football, recruiting, and more for blueandgold.com on the On3 network. Game week has finally arrived for Notre Dame football. The Irish will head into Hard Rock Stadium on Sunday night for a top 10 matchup with Miami. A big reason why both teams have high expectations heading into the season is experience along the offensive line, which made this week a perfect time to invite former Notre Dame offensive lineman Aaron Taylor back onto our podcast. Aaron is a college football analyst for CBS Sports, and he recently launched Trench Life, a YouTube show highlighting line play for the Joe Moore Award. Aaron, thanks for joining us.
Tyler, thank you, man. And how about shout outs to us? We have to be the biggest damn podcast in America right now with us three. We're 3/5 of the way to having a pretty good unit ourselves.
I'm ready to go push some cars in the snow.
Let's go. Let's go, Eric. Let's go.
Yeah, that reference comes from Aaron Taylor's interview with Joe Rudolph. I watched that interview that you did with the Trench Life series with Notre Dame offensive line coach Joe Rudolph. I really enjoyed it. What were your biggest takeaways from your time with him?
That he's somebody I'd want my sons to play for, right? We, as parents, I've got pretty good athletes. They play water polo. That's the sport that they chose. But you want to be able to turn your kids over to somebody that's going to extend and hopefully grow and develop what it is you started. Because I didn't listen to my parents. I'm sure you guys didn't listen to yours. Then you get older and you're like, oh, shoot, they knew what they were talking about. Well, we need those uncles or coaches or other people around to continue to develop. And what came clear right away was how much preparation he put into that interview. And the interview starts with him going over what he goes over with his student athletes that come into his room. And it was so detailed, and it was values-based. It was standards-based. It just gave this really thoughtful – I felt like I was a freshman coming into his room for the first time and learning what the standard was. So coaches have to have answers, but they're developers of talent. They've got to be really good teachers. And I think Joe Rudolph has proven that he can do that. And when I look back on last year, that was the team I was most proud of in the 30 years since I've left campus. It's the one I cheered the hardest for. It's the one I rooted the most for. I'm throwing stuff at the TV like I'm a nutcase. And my wife's like, what's going on? I'm like, this team is gritty, man. Like, they reminded us of us. And that's not any slight on the former teams. But all that is to say is I felt the offensive line's performance from a grit standpoint, week one on the road at Texas A&M at night in the hottest part of the summer, was indicative of who that team would eventually evolve to grow into after the Northern Illinois loss. So if you had to personify a room or choose a room that personified rather the makeup of the team as the O-line room, and all of that started with Joe Rudolph. So that series of what we're doing with the offensive line coaches on Trench Life is called building blocks, right? Little double entendre of how we build good blockers, but what are the foundations of development? And I think the interview did a great job of doing that. And that's a credit to him, not because I'm a good question asker.
Well, the smile on your face every time the camera showed you was like I used to look back when I didn't have a very trained palate and the McRib was coming back. When I heard that was coming back, that was a smile I had.
Shout out to the McRib,
baby. The connection to Joe Moore, I knew from last January that he was doing that in an interview I did down in Atlanta with him. I said, wow, that is really cool. But to see it, to see Joe Moore on video standing over an overhead projection teaching offensive linemen was like looking at a hologram. What went through your mind when you were watching that? What memories got churned up? What did you think of him using that as a tool?
It's a great observation, Eric, because it's a time warp. It immediately transports me and all of us back to hearing that voice. Now, we used to, fear that voice. We didn't want to hear it, especially when our name was coming out of it. But, hey, Taylor, I wish you were the heavyweight champ of the world. You know why? Because I'd be the next. Now sit down and shut up. And be like, So to hear him tell the story of the snow and pushing the car in the snow and what that is for the viewers at home. I hope you go watch the video. He said his car would break down and he didn't have his elbows up here and pitter-patting his feet. He got up underneath it and lowered his shoulders and really had to drive his legs. And the point of that is on day one, we all had a visual picture of what we were trying to do, and then we spent the time working to get there. But he was the best there's ever been. Sent 52 guys to the NFL in 18 seasons. Never had a starter that was a senior at Notre Dame that didn't go on to the NFL. Multiple college and football Hall of Famers. The guy was able to squeeze every ounce of water out of every possible rock he could, and he did that for our sake, not his. And that somehow got communicated. It was never a direct, overt conversation, but all of us that bought in, Eric, I think, on some level knew he wasn't about him. He was about us. And it bothered him. And talking with Greg Hudson just called me right now. I had to click off on the phone right there. That was my GA with Joe back in the day. And I did an interview yesterday with Joe for this week's Trench, or with Greg for this week's Trench Life. And he didn't talk about this on camera, but behind the scenes, like, Joe was a little bit neurotic. Like, things would bother him. He'd be like, what the hell's going on with Taylor's left foot? Like, what can we do? And he'd ask Greg like 10 times, what's going on with his left foot? What's going on with his left foot? And what Greg tells is he would ask so much because he was thinking about it, and he wanted to see if there was a new answer that would spark a new thought so that he could come up with the solution. It wasn't, damn, we got to get Taylor's foot right and what's wrong with him. It's what's going on with Taylor's foot. And that's a subtle shift in approach and how you're looking at things, but I think it's part of the secret sauce that he had that made him the best offensive line coach this game's ever seen.
Aaron, you mentioned last year's offensive line with Notre Dame and the pride that you had in that group. What are your expectations for the unit this year? What can maybe take it from the level it was at last year and elevate it to the next level?
Consistency, depth. You know, that showed up last year. It's already showed up this year. You know, shout out to three-wheeled ATVs or whatever the hell it was. And your heart breaks for Charles because I talked to him in camp last year, and he was in the sling and his arm was all banged up. And it's like, this, you want 10 of these dudes, both on the field but in your room. He comes back in the playoffs, makes an instant difference. And it was already good. And that's one of the things that we've seen. And this is really interesting. This is me on a soapbox, not even on a soapbox, but there's been something going on behind the scenes in the O-line world for the last 2 or 3 years that the Joe Moore Award Committee has witnessed. And that's that when you lose one starter, there's this force multiplier effect where you lose 1.5 to 2 starters worth of production, if you will. It's like 2 guys went down, and we couldn't put our finger on it. And what we believe is happening is that the transfer portal has eradicated and leached out some of that chemistry when guys are in the room for so long. We saw what happened to Joe Rudolph's room at the end of the season. Boom, you lose a couple starters. You go to Indiana, you go to a couple different other places. It makes it tough to build that development. So when one guy goes down, the new guy that comes up, either too young or he's fresh to the program, and it makes that chemistry and cohesion really different or difficult. So moving forward, I think what we're going to see is the offensive line units that can stay integral, that have depth, are going to navigate these 16-game, 17-game seasons much better than a team that's got 6 guys that they can win with. You better have 8 or 9 that can play to have a shot. So to take the next level, that's what Notre Dame's got to do. They're talented, man. They've got the best running back room in America. They got a good young quarterback with a high ceiling. The first time in 4 years, you got a guy that's not a one and done. There's a defense that can get you off the field, and you can play small ball, like some receivers on the outside. Like, there's a lot to be excited about, but that offensive line has to continue to lead the charge, just like they did week 1 on the road at Texas A&M. And I believe it'll be the same thing on the road down in South Beach.
Aaron, when we were at the press conference on Tuesday, it was usually on Monday, it was on Tuesday this week, Marcus mentioned Guerby, Lambert, and Sullivan, Absher, the guys that are trying to plug in for Charles Jagusah. It's a virtual tie. And he was asked, well, is there a chance both of them could play? Why would that be a good idea to rotate them? Why would that be a bad idea to rotate them and not break that tie?
That's a damn thoughtful question, Eric. Look at you, bro. Look at you. Pressure's on.
I watch
Tyler.
your videos.
Bring some heat, Tyler. No, Eric, it's a great question. And the pros are development, right? You're going to need 7, 8, 9 guys by the end of the year. It could be that there's a close competition and they want to compete. The bottom line is everybody would prefer one guy, because if you can have the same 5 senior starters all season long, you're going to fare better. In fact, that's what Army had last year, and they were the most consistent unit by far that we saw in college football last year, Navy notwithstanding. And that's what allowed them to be at their best when their best was needed week in and week out. So you want that consistency. That is key, particularly at our position, because if I'm working with you and you're the left tackle, Eric, and I'm the left guard, we have to work together on combo blocks. Depending on where that backer's cheated, I may need to leave faster. If he's tighter, I can go slower, but I need to know what you need based on what you've got so that I know how I can do what I need to do. And we got to communicate that very quickly. And sometimes we can't communicate it. Sometimes we just have to feel it and know it. Then you got the back and what he's looking for when he wants to hit that cutback. If you've got people rotating in and out, as a guard, you've got a player on each side that you have to have that relationship with. The center has the guard and the guard on each side. The other guard has the right tackle in the center. So all of that chemistry on every play, 5 have to function as one, and that's really difficult to do, to get that familiarity where it's second nature and there is no discussion, because you just know what that is when you can leave to do what it is you need to do. So the pros obviously are depth. You've got competition. Both players will be the best versions of themselves and be as developed as they can by the time the season starts and, of course, ends. The downside is you've got some chemistry problems, and it may take you 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to figure that out. But what that typically indicates is coaches are trying to find their 5 best on the field. That's what they want ultimately. Then you want that to stay consistent. And that's why I got moved to left guard to left tackle my senior year, because I was one of the best 5, but they needed a left tackle. So, hey, Taylor, you're playing left tackle this year. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that was the whole conversation. And I was a unanimous All-American or whatever the hell it was, a guard. I was like, but Joe, there's a lot of space out there, man. Like, those dudes are built different than these dudes. Like, I like the Bryant Youngs of the world. There's some other guys out there I'm not real big fans of. And it was an excruciatingly difficult challenge for me to move one spot over to my left. And the analogy I use is like, I'm on a Mac computer right now. I used to be a PC guy, right? So when I switched over, it was like, man, I'm on Microsoft Word and trying to type documents. It does all the same stuff, but it's in a little different spot, and it was clunky and frustrating, and I had to figure it out before I could get proficient. That's what it's like even moving one position over. The box looks completely different from here to here, so you don't know where guys are cheated, so you have to listen for different things, and there's just a whole array of things that happen with simple moves like that. So the pros are depth, and the cons are continuity and cohesion and chemistry.
I'm going to follow that up with this one, and then Tyler will hit me. Charles Jagusah, we think at some point is going to come back during the season. He is a guy that against Penn State came in and played big leverage situations against Penn State at right guard, then started at left guard in the national, or left tackle. So he went right to left, guard to tackle in the national championship game. When he comes back, is that a problem? Is that a challenge? Is that a good thing? And what do you do with him?
It's not, it's a blessing, man. It's a blessing for him personally. Let's start there. But also for that room, like, he's really well respected in that room, and he's earned that. A younger guy that is not as good as Charles has to understand that, you know, he's not necessarily a placeholder, but you got to get the 5 best on the team. And that's what's unique about our position. If you're getting replaced by Charles, who's not played all season, it sucks for the guy that's worked his ass off and had that spot. But the fabric of that room is, we got to do what's best for the team. And our position requires, it demands that we sacrifice everything, our ego, our comfort, our own playing time for the greater good. So you can't be an O-lineman in good faith and fight that. Does that mean you have to like it? Hell no. But you welcome it and you support it. And that's what that room and that brotherhood is about. Either it's a brotherhood or it's not. In Joe's room, it is. In most good O-line rooms, it is. So you want to give Charles an opportunity to be able to play. And typically, the guy that's been the starter all season long, if he's good enough, he's going to find a way to play. And it could be that you have a rotation in that you have the original starter in there for continuity. Charles gets sprinkled in till he can develop that. And now you've got this added depth and situations where once he's healthy, he can come back in and help, because we saw towards the end of the year, you need as many bodies as you can that can play. And I think it's a new world that we're living in, man. And I think it would be a blessing if Charles can get himself back and be healthy, both for him and that room.
And speaking of guys that can move around, I think there was at least an external thought that maybe Anthonie Knapp would move inside. I think mostly because of his size, and partially because maybe that was what he was recruited at, and thought maybe that would be the long-term plan for him. But what did you see from him as a freshman at that left tackle, and why can he continue to succeed at that position?
That's a great question, T. First of all, I'm a damn Hall of Famer, okay? And I say that humbly to make this point. Zero chance I could have started at Notre Dame as a true freshman. None. Zero. For that kid to be able to do that at Texas A&M and play as well as he did all season long, maybe at a position that he's not suited for. And you got to remember, fans are judging him against Joe Alt. Come on, y'all. Like, this kid's a true freshman out there in the road at night in the SEC playing against a bunch of D linemen that are now in the NFL. And like, well, why isn't this guy playing? Why is this dude playing? You kid, man, you're going to get me cursing on here. It's incredible what he did. And he's a big reason why I love that unit and I love that team the way that I did, because he took haymaker after haymaker, and you watched his development throughout the season, though. It got better. If you had watched me as a true freshman, I would have been like this. It moves so fast when you're young. People don't understand how hard it is as a true freshman to be able to do it. When I started as a sophomore, it was moving fast. I'd come up to the line of scrimmage and Gene McGuire or Lindsey Knapp would see me like this and I'd be like 54. Like, oh, thank God. Boom. And I just go try to block him because I had no idea who I was supposed to block, what I was supposed to do. And the evolution is it a run or a pass? What's my assignment? Is this the right guy or not? But by the time you're a sophomore and a junior and eventually a senior, it all slows down. And you're thinking, okay, he's a tight shade. The backer's bossed over. We've got motion here. It's twins on this side. We're to the field. They like to bring two from the outside. I got to be careful of a slant here. That's the thought process as you get older. As a freshman, you're like, I hope this is my guy, right? You're lucky if you remembered the whole play call and heard anything after that, just listening for your part of whatever it is or looking at the signal like they do now. So, man, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. People are, frustrated with this guy that's about to be a 4-year starter at Notre Dame at the offensive line. I don't know what the mix is, because a lot of that is determined with what the other pieces are. But again, if you look through the lens of we got to get our 5 best on the field, he's one of those 5. Maybe when Charles comes back, that switches some things and gives them some options to be able to put everybody in their positions of strength. Because in the football world, you're trying to maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses, period. As a team, individually, every room, each side of the ball. Joe Moore believed that as long as you're as good at what you do or better than they are at what they do, they'll give you the weakness. You don't have to search for it because you're just exerting your will on them and you're better at what you do than they do. But sometimes that's chalk talk, and you got to attack weaknesses and defend your own. So putting players where they function best to get those 5 best at their 5 best, the good to great, right? The right dudes on the bus, but also in the right seats. That's kind of the loose metaphor of what you want. And I think that remains to be seen. The kid, I thought, did an outstanding job at left tackle last year, given his age and his development. And I'm really excited to see what he and the rest of that room could do on the road against Miami.
Aaron, speaking of your freshman year, you guys played Miami. It was the last game in the series, supposedly, until hell froze over. And that's actually how it played out. It was 2010 when it was resurrected in El Paso, and it snowed in El Paso. So that's what brought this back. This will be the 5th game in life after death with the Miami series. What are your recollections of that final Miami series? And was the 90 game particularly contentious, or are we thinking more the late 80s matchups?
there were some undertones and certainly some residual feelings left over from the late 80s. I think we had moved on from the Catholics versus the convicts, and it was a somewhat different era, but there was some nostalgia, I remember, because it was Miami and Notre Dame and the impact and relevance and significance of that game. And what I remember particularly about it is I had worked my way up to second string by that time in the year, and I was a freshman, and I got to dress. And Tim Ryan comes to the sideline. He's playing against this dude, 67, whose name was Russell Maryland, and he starts throwing up. On the sidelines, I'm like, oh my God, Tim, please be okay. Tim, please be healthy. Dear Lord, please put your healing hands on Tim Ryan. Let him stop throwing up. Please let him go back in the game. Don't make me have to play today. I'm not ready, God, please. So my best memory is literally lighting a candle in the grotto in my head on the sidelines, praying to the actual and football gods to not go in the game, that Tim Ryan was going to be okay, because I wanted nothing to do with Russell Maryland as a 15 or 17-year-old or whatever the hell I was at that time. So I just remember the bigness of it. And this sounds crazy, but like among the memories seared in my brain was the first Michigan game under the lights where, you know, Meyer scores a touchdown and it's the cover of Sports Illustrated, the Golden Boy. The speech that Holtz gave after, you know, see, man, you follow the plan, you'll never lose a game in this stadium. Bought in right out of the gate. But in pregame, walking down the stairs, you walk out to the field, and I'm like, holy bleep, there's Michigan with those ugly helmets. And there was this big dude that jogged by. He's way bigger than me. And I looked, and it was like I was in awe of being on the field with Michigan football players. Like, not, you know, let alone who I'm on the field with and what I'm doing, but like there's that moment we all have where it's like, holy shit, this is real. Like these are real dudes. And I remember having that feeling coming out of the tunnel and seeing Miami. And I remember the talk about the fight. I wonder if there's going to be a fight today. And what am I going to do? I'm going to grab a helmet, like, you know, but not take my own, like Rocket said, and, you know, all those different things. So that game is, it was billed as good as evil, Catholics versus convicts. And there's a lot that's wrong with that. We've seen the documentary, and I think we're beyond that. Now it's just two mega brands in football that are looking to take that next step to put a stake in the ground that we're for real. We're on good, solid footing. Mario his back's against the wall a little bit as far as I'm concerned. Crystal ball, Miami's coach, they had a real good quarterback last year. They got Carson Beck this year, but it wasn't good enough last year. They fell short in key moments. So I think this is going to be a hell of a game and a real good litmus test for both of these teams that I think we can withstand a loss to Miami more than maybe Miami can withstand a loss to us. We'll see how that shakes out, but it's a new era we're in, and I think it's going to be a hell of a fun watch.
Aaron, while we're talking about Miami, what are your expectations for how good that Miami offensive line can be this season?
It's interesting. Mario's got Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, the head coach and the offensive line coach, are both very instrumental there. Mario won the first ever Joe Moore Award at Alabama. Had some really good players in that room. It's watching them on tape last year. They've got a right tackle that's big and physical, didn't give up many pressures. Scheme helped them a lot. I want to see some physicality and some consistency there. I think they struggle with movement at times. I think Notre Dame can win some one-on-one battles there. I think they have to play discipline and play sound. What we can't do as a defense is be on our heels and let them come straight downhill at us. They like a play called duo, which is, you know, double teams across the board. It's like basically power without a pulling guard. And it's designed to get movement and give the back two-way goes. He can hit here, he can hit here, and they have an idea of where it's going to be, but it's almost like a straight-ahead zone behind double-team blocks. And you got to rattle Carson back. You got to be able to throw them fronts and things and blitzes and looks that they're not prepared for. And that's always difficult on both sides of the ball for any offense week one, because there's plenty of time to work on wrinkles and surprises. So I think we got to nullify the run game. We got to be able to create some pressure for Carson Beck and test. What's going to happen is there's going to be adversity early for probably both of these teams. How do you weather that storm? We saw Iowa State, Kansas State. Iowa State's offensive line gave up 2 sacks, each tackle within the first 12 plays. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be a bloodbath. When you do that, when you're the guy that gives up the sack in the first series, you're like, that's in your head the rest of the game. That's the 12th defender that's now in the box that you have to defend against all game long, because you remember that play, but you have to forget about it, set your feet and punch, and hang in there and hunker down and weather the hailstorm, as Brian Jones likes to say, my colleague here at CBS. So they did that. And in the fourth quarter, they held the ball for 12 minutes, and Kansas State only had it 3. And Carson Hansen, their running back, 10 carries, 59 yards. 4 of those carries were for first downs. They just chewed clock. And that offensive line that looked a mess early became the heroes of that game, in my opinion, and kickstarted a phenomenal season for them. So Iowa State weathered the storms better than Kansas State did, literally, and pun intended and not intended, because it was raining on both sides. But those are the moments, and that's the makeup of the good team. And just like when Holtz gave us that speech in 1990 under the lights when we beat Michigan about following the plan and don't flinch, the team that's able to do that to the best degree is going to walk out victorious, and they'll both be tested. And I'm really interested to see how they handle those tests.
Aaron, I could talk to you for an hour and a half, and there would be a voice screaming at me after 10 minutes, I think. So I'm going to give you my last question, and that's something that came up in the video. And I thought this was really interesting. You guys were watching film of Aamil Wagner, and Joe Rudolph said, okay, here's where I can go to Lauren Lando, the director of football performance, basically the strength and conditioning coach. And here's how we can help Aamil correct this through sports science, through the weight room, and so forth. Did that even exist in any form when you were playing? And what do you think about him having that kind of resource to be able to help these guys get better?
It's phenomenal, man. The resources available to these guys today is exceptional. And we had access to that, but it wasn't nearly as developed. And, I was at the tail end of the era where, water made you weak. Well, you need some water? Come on, be mentally tough, right? We've evolved from that, thankfully. But we had Jerry Schmidt, and you look at the effect that he had on Notre Dame winning the national championship. Then he went to Florida and won the national championship. He went to Oklahoma, I think, prior to that, won a national championship. Everywhere he's been, he's won natties. And the strength and conditioning coach, in my opinion, is the second most important coach on the staff because they touch the players the most. That's where me and Bryant Young and Tim Ruddy and Jeff Burris and all of the great players we had in our class, those were the 4 captains. That's where we learned how to compete in winter conditioning, walking to Loftus in the snow at 5 a.m. These kids can't start working before 6 a.m. now. They got kids these days. So that's where the role was back then, is just to make us tough, give us that edge so that when he turned us over to Coach Moore, we were ready to go, and then we could get our asses kicked again. So where sports performance and sciences come, and I think the thing, Eric, that I didn't fully appreciate as a player, and this was just being young and naive, is how directly what I did in the weight room was tied to what I did when I played. And it's the same naivete I used with how I drink 4 or 5 nights a week is directly impacting, how injured I was. I didn't make those connections back then. The fuel that I put in my Formula One race car directly impacts the performance that can go around the track when inches or milliseconds matter. It all matters, but the sport-specific and position-specific training is exceptional. And Notre Dame staff does a great job. And what I heard in that was that there's a direct link between the coach and what's happening on the field and the person and the support around to fix that problem. Not drills before and after practice. Joe handled that. But here's what we can do in the weight room. I've got something called valgus in one of my legs. I don't straighten my right leg because I tore my PCL, so my glute shuts down. So my glute shuts down. I still need to stabilize my knee, so my IT band takes over, and it puts this bend, with my foot going this way, it puts a bend. So I got to straighten that out. Otherwise, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone's connected to the hip bone. Everything starts compensating. And it gets out of whack. That's when you get injuries. That's how I ruptured both my patella tendons. I had terrible ankle flexion. And had I had access to these resources like these kids do now and been smart enough to listen, I might have still be playing in the damn NFL. So it's remarkable that whole chain is connected, and not surprising. It has to be at this level. And just, again, one of the many ways that Marcus has built a tremendous program, and these kids are in really good hands.
Aaron, before we let you go, you mentioned captains, and Notre Dame has two of its captains are offensive linemen, and that's the way Marcus Freeman handles it. He lets the players vote for that. Marcus Freeman has talked about this is an offensive line, defensive line driven program, but to see it reflected in the captains, does that tell you that the players beyond just the offensive line and defensive line are really buying into that identity of this Notre Dame program?
Buckle up. That's all I'm saying. Buckle up. It's the greatest honor I got at Notre Dame. Wasn't all the trophies and awards and Lombardi and all that stuff. It was being picked by my peers to be a captain, along with the guys that I was sitting next to, like to be on the same shelf and level with a Bryant Young and a Tim Ruddy and a Jeff Burris, for three tremendous players and even better people. Like, you want your best players to be your best leaders and vice versa. And Notre Dame's getting to a position where that's finally becoming the consistent case. But beyond that, it's a line of scrimmage game, and it's still a game of blocking and tackling. And if you're not a program that can get stops on third down and pick up those gotta-have-it situations, you're just not going to go as far as you're able to go and want to go. Now, you need the other pieces around. You need a receiver that can take the top off. You need a quarterback that can drop it in. You need a run game to ice games late. But having offensive and defensive linemen in the captain's position sends a loud message that Notre Dame's football program is built on a foundation of rock-solid granite and has a shot to return to the national championship this year. And who knows, fans? Maybe this is a year for us Irish fans. Who knows? Who knows? I don't want to say anything. I don't want to jinx it. Clemson's going to win the whole thing. That's all I'm saying. Clemson's going to win.
All right, Aaron, that's all we got for you. We really appreciate you taking time to talk to us. Always a blast. And folks, if you have not checked out Trench Life yet, go do that. If you're interested in offensive line play at all, I think you'll really enjoy it. I know Eric and I were raving about it before Aaron even hopped on the podcast this morning. So
we'll put a link in the comments too.
Perfect.
So we'll
it's at Joe Moore Award 2015. That's the year we were founded. There's another channel that we have, but just Google Trench Life Joe Moore Award on YouTube, and boom, it should pop up. It's going to be a great show. Greg Hudson and I break down the entire ACC from a line of scrimmage standpoint. So you get to see LSU, Clemson, you get to see Notre Dame-Miami. We talk about Texas and Ohio State. It's meaty. I'm really excited about this episode. And then Chris Kapilovic, Alabama's coach, comes on. He breaks down tape for us a lot like we did with Joe Rudolph. There's a cut-down version, a 7-minute of the interview with Coach Rudolph in there. And just trying to shine a light on big, fat, hairy guys. like we did here, boys. This is what we've done. We've done the same thing. The lights
Look
are
at
on
us. All right, Aaron, have a good one.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Before we get back to the podcast, I wanted to share a word from our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Huddle up, football fans. Tailgate season is here, and nobody gets you ready for game day like Academy Sports and Outdoors. Swing by your local Academy store or shop online at academy.com to find everything you need, from grills to jerseys and more. Be a watch party legend with gear from top brands like Nike and Under Armour, all at unbeatable prices every day. With 8 Academy stores across Indiana and a new store coming soon to Mishawaka, fun can't lose, and neither can you. Gear up today at Academy Sports and Outdoors. All right, now it's time for questions. You can submit questions to us on Twitter or the Loose Emoji board before every podcast. I'm at TJamesND and Eric's at eHansenND. First one I have for us, Eric, is from at Charles W. Wolf. Any predictions on a player due for breakout performance against Miami?
Yeah, and with me, I always kind of struggle with what's the definition of breakout performance. Like, do guys coming from other schools, does that count, like Ty Washington and so forth? But I had a long list and I narrowed it down to one guy, and I'm going with Jason Onye, the defensive tackle, who's a 5th-year senior. We call them redshirt seniors now. Missed most of last season for mental health reasons. When Marcus Freeman said, Jason Onye in August had been as good as any interior defensive lineman as Notre Dame's had during his time here, which is since 2021. My jaw dropped. And I said, he's due for a breakout game. So Jason is my pick.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that based on the way that Marcus Freeman talked about him. I defensively, like, I think Bryce Young is in a position to do that.
Sure. He was on my list.
Offensively, and I feel like these guys we've been talking about a lot during the offseason, I think it's now we're just expecting, like, this is their chance to show everyone. Will Pauling, for me, like, I think there's a lot of high expectations for Malachi Fields, and I think he will be very important for Notre Dame this season. And I think I predicted.
But him having 2 800-yard seasons, is it a breakout game for him to have a big game? Yeah.
But Pauling, at least in my opinion, came to Notre Dame with maybe more questions because he had a great season 2 years ago, and then last year wasn't as good, although he was still technically Wisconsin's leading receiver in receptions. But I really think Will Pauling is going to make his mark on this Notre Dame offense in this opening game. And so that would be my offensive pick there. All right, next question is from Marie Biafore at Biafore_Marie. You have each been tasked with scripting the first series of plays for the game. What are each of you running? What do you think Mike Denbrock will script?
What I think, Marie, is that he's going to script plays that give him a roadmap of what new Miami defensive Corey Heatherman is all about. So it's going to be like when you watch a heavyweight fight in the first couple rounds, they're kind of feeling each other out. That's what Mike Denbrock's going to do with formation, with motion. He's going to try to see what Miami's tendencies are, what they do well, what they don't do well. And then I think you'll see him attack. So I don't know this is necessarily what you would typically see with a script of a team that's been well scouted and you have a really good idea of how you want to attack. I think this is more of a feeling out process. And then you adjust. There's going to be a lot of in-game adjustments after those first couple of offensive series.
Yeah, I don't. This is at least the second time we've been asked to call plays for the Miami game, and unfortunately for Notre Dame, that's not going to happen. I've already, when we were asked it previously, I already said that I want to run some two back on the first play and hand it off to Love or Price and sort of see how the defense reacts. So I'd probably stick with that if you feel confident with that going into the game. Work in some throws to the running backs, play action shot or two. Does that open up the middle of the field for someone like Eli Raridan? So that's my sense. I don't know for sure if Mike Denbrock's going to follow that script necessarily, but I think it will be a way to sort of take some pressure off of CJ Carr, get the ball in the playmaker's hands, and let the offensive line sort of dictate the tone from the start. I think would make a lot of sense. All right, next question is from Bakorwin on the loose emoji board. Over under for Carr passing yards and touchdowns against Miami for Notre Dame to win. My guess is 225 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think Miami is going to load the box and try to put it on Carr for Notre Dame to win. Play action could be especially productive this season. I'm definitely ready to see Jeremiah Love in the slot versus a linebacker or safety.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see the different ways that Mike Denbrock goes about trying to unload the box. And I think there's going to be several ways, and it's going to look different than last year when you had a prolific runner at quarterback like Riley Leonard. I do think we'll see some quarterback runs from CJ Carr, more of, hey, nobody's open and there's a gap in the middle of the field and I can get 8 yards pretty easily, than, okay, let's tuck it and go sometimes, like, and as a designed run like Riley Leonard had. I'm going to go 200 yards and 1 touchdown. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. I think Notre Dame's going to get its touchdowns on the ground more than it will through the air. And I'm also curious to see how Jeremiah Love is going to be used to try to get mismatches in the passing game. You know, he may end up with a nickel on him sometimes if he's in the slot, but that could be a mismatch depending on how physical that nickel is. So it'll be really interesting, because I know Jeremiah has worked really hard on being a really good receiver this offseason.
Yeah, I had cut down that over underline for Carr in the same way. Like, I think around 200 yards and 1 touchdown would be what I would expect. I mean, I think Notre Dame can win with Carr having 175 passing yards and no touchdown passes. Riley Leonard last year against A&M was 18 of 30 for 158 yards with no touchdown passes. I think there's some similarities with that game. And this one, certainly Notre Dame's offensive line is much more experienced. The experience is sort of flipped between the quarterback and the offensive line from last year. So I don't think CJ Carr is going to have to go out and win the game with his arm. Maybe make the defense respect what he can do with that. But I think Notre Dame is talented enough to be able to control the game with its running game. All right, next question is from @IrishBears. Compare CJ Carr to the following players. Who would you be more confident in week 1? Clausen from 2008, Golson from 2012, Kaiser from 2015, and Buckner from 2022.
So am I just answering which of those 4 players I'd be most confident in, or who I think CJ Carr is similarly developmentally at this stage? Am I doing both?
What I sort of did was like I sort of ranked them from like who I would be most confident in.
Okay.
And fit Carr in that equation.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now I understand the assignment. I would put Kaiser 2015 at the top of that confidence list. Clausen 2008 next, I guess. Although Kaiser was a revelation rather than, we knew Jimmy Clausen was going to be good. And then I would probably sneak Carr in there, definitely ahead of Golson and Buckner. But Clausen was the number 1 player in the country. He was healthy. He had all these great offensive weapons around him. And I think there was a lot of confidence. Kaiser also had really good weapons around him. But, I mean, I think he was a better college player. I mean, the 2015 team was better than any of the ones Clausen played on. So I'd put Carr in the middle with the thought that he could, as the season goes on, he could be the best of that group. But that Clausen 2008 had some pretty good numbers, and so did Kaiser 2015. So I just muddled that answer terribly.
Yeah, I try to think of it as like what you thought about those guys going into the season rather than what they ended up doing. And so Kaiser's at the bottom of my list because I don't think anyone thought that Kaiser would do what he ended up doing at the beginning of the season. I had Clausen at the top. Clausen from 2008. He of all those guys to that point in his career, he'd played the most in 2007. He had playing experience. I know Buckner played in 2021 a bit, but not to the same extent that Clausen did. So I went Clausen at the top. I put Carr right behind him, ahead of Buckner. I think he could go either way. I did actually. It's hard to like remember what you thought of them going into the season. So I went back and I found an old Place Your Bets that we did, and I had set an over/under line of 217.5 passing yards versus Ohio State for Tyler Buckner, and predicted the under. So I obviously wasn't expecting him to light it up. Granted, that's against an Ohio State team that we all know was pretty good. And then I had Golson 2012. That was just like right when I started covering the team, so I didn't have a great understanding of what he could be. And then Kaiser at the bottom of that. So hopefully that made sense, and I didn't muddle it as well.
Okay.
All right, next one is from Fighting Mike 87 on the loose emoji board. Will Notre Dame have a 3,000-yard passer, 1,000-yard receiver, and 1,000-yard rusher in the 2025 regular season? If not, why?
I'm most confident in the 1,000-yard rusher, even with all the depth Notre Dame has at running back. I think Jeremiah Love will get 1,000 yards. I think he'll have enough touches to get that and enough breakaway runs to get that. My next, I'll go with a yes, but I'm not super confident in that. Malachi Fields has been over 800 yards a couple times now. He was not on a prolific passing team, and yet Notre Dame has so many more receiving options than Virginia did. So will that tamp down what his total is? But I think he's capable, and I think he's going to get a lot of touches as a boundary receiver. I don't think they're going to try to rotate 3 guys in there. The least likely, I think, is the 3,000 yards passer. It's only been done 8 times in Notre Dame history, and that's including the bowl game in that total. It'd be a little bit less, and 4 of those 8 were by Jimmy Clausen and Brady Quinn under Charlie Weiss. So the other 4 out of all the years of Notre Dame football, it's only been done 4 times. And I think Notre Dame's offense is just too balanced to produce 3,000 yards. And I don't think Notre Dame will be playing from behind in a lot of games either that would warrant more passing yards than what they're going to want to be doing in a game.
Yeah, certainly. Like if Notre Dame makes a longer run in the season, that increases the chances of all these things happening with more games. I do think both the receiving and passing figures will be hard to get to. I'm just not sure that it'll be like very lopsided in terms of one receiver to get to 1,000 yards. The last time a Notre Dame receiver hit that mark was Chase Claypool in 2019. And there's only been 13 occurrences of 1,000-yard seasons for a receiver in Notre Dame history. So it's not that frequent either. Jeremiah Love rushed for 1,000 yards last year. I think he could certainly do that again. So that's the most likely, but I'm just not sure that Carr will be expected to throw and be needed to throw as much to hit that 3,000-yard mark, which was, I think, last accomplished by Jack Cohn in 2021. All right. At Mike DeVoy 1, thanks for bringing the podcast back, Eric and Tyler. Your excellent work and insights are really appreciated. I saw some highlights of Rocket Ismail bursting through small holes in a logjam of players, then shifting to another gear to outrun everyone. Rocket was truly a joy to watch. J Love reminds me of him when he sees just a crack of daylight and suddenly bursts through it at top speed. Do you see them as similar in running style? I know Rocket was a receiver, but they worked to get him the ball in so many ways.
Yeah, and there were times Rocket was primarily a running back, so he bounced back between both. No, I do not see them as similar, other than they're both super fast. I mean, a lot of people were looking at the back of their jersey. But, I mean, Rocket was a pretty slight build. Jeremiah Love, I mean, he was below 200 when he came into Notre Dame. He's, about 214 now. And, I mean, that 2-yard run that he had against Penn State, Rocket isn't making that run, but I could see Rocket making a lot of 98-yard runs where he again burst through, and he's, for a little guy, he was really strong, but not Jeremiah Love strong. So I would say they have differing styles.
Well, I'm glad you said that too, because Rocket predates me following college football. I've seen plenty of highlights of him, but I never got to see him on a play-to-play basis like I watched Jeremiah Love. So I was like, well, maybe there's similarities if you were there and saw it that I didn't catch onto. I just think the physicality that Jeremiah Love plays with makes them different. I mean, he's an elite running back. Rocket was an elite player. I don't know that he was ever an elite running back. So I think there's some differences there.
He's the fastest Notre Dame player that I think I've seen, and certainly his vision is one of the best.
All right. Next question is from Bob_Oxnard on the loose emoji board. Has Jack Larson developed into an adequate inline blocker?
We're going to find out pretty quickly, but the fact that he is ahead of James Flanagan on the depth chart, I think, is a good sign. Marcus Freeman was asked about the tight ends beyond Eli Reardon in the Tuesday press conference and had some good things to say about Jack Larson. I mean, he's bigger. He's 250 now. He's 6'3", so he's a little bit shorter than some of the other tight ends, but 250. And when Mike Denbrock was asked about tight ends by me, I think in the last time we had him, he brought up Jack Larson as well. I still think his strength is his pass catching, but if he is playing ahead of James Flanagan, I think by default you say, okay, he's gotten it together enough to be at least an adequate blocker at this point.
Yeah, time will tell. I'm not necessarily certain that it's happened yet. I just haven't seen enough to feel confident in that. I think it might have been the last practice we saw. There was a time where some of the tight ends joined the offensive line to do some blocking stuff, and Jack Larson was still with the receivers catching passes. So I don't know if that means anything, but I think, at least from my perspective, you would imagine that if he was like needed to be a blocking guy, granted they don't have a lot of tight ends, so it's hard to figure out what that means, but I do think what Eric mentioned about James Flanagan is important, because that is a guy that I think is physical and probably could block. And then the fact that Jack Larson has held him off for now on the depth chart is probably a good sign for Jack Larson's development. Next question is from LDL Go Irish on the loose emoji board. One concern I have that I have not heard much discussion about is, can Xavier Watts be replaced? Watts had an uncanny ability to routinely stop big plays from happening, a tackle after taking the right angle, a timely interception, a blitz, tackle for loss, or PBU. I know there is talent at safety. How are their instincts in film study, and will they have the same field coverage as Watts did?
What I would say, and Xavier Watts is one of my favorite players I've ever covered. Watts left a legacy. The safeties are better because of him. The safeties on this team are better because of him. The corners are better because of him, because he took a leadership role and he taught those guys how to watch film and how to develop into a player that would, I mean, Watts had natural instincts, but also using film study to be even better at that. I think those guys have those kind of habits. They had this guy, and now you see Adon Schuler as a captain kind of taking on that role. They're not going to make up his production with one person. Jalen Stroman isn't going to be Xavier Watts. But when you spread out that production, I think you will get the Xavier Watts production from the deep safety group that they have, and I think from the cornerbacks as well, and the nickel.
Yeah, I do think it's a fair question, and probably something we haven't maybe sort of pushed back on enough. I do think Adon Schuler will continue to blossom and do some of that playmaking that Xavier Watts did. Probably not to the same level as he did, because that was truly elite, and it's a high bar to surpass there. But I agree. I think there's very capable safeties on the back end. You're not trying to replace him with one person. The mix of who they have back there, Jalen Stroman, Luke Talich, Tay Johnson, I think will do a number of different things, but certainly they have a lot to replace. So if there's maybe something at least I'm overlooking, I think that's a fair point. At our TCND 543 says on the loose emoji board, says, what is the sense on where Christian Gray is and how not having Watts behind him is going to affect play calling aggressiveness for Chris Ash with the secondary?
I think his stock is up. I mean, he's on NFL radar right now. You see him pop up in some of these how good are the cornerbacks, and his name pops up because he's draft eligible after this season. Leonard Moore is not. I talked to Leonard Moore a couple times about Christian Gray and his turnaround. Christian also has talked to us, and he didn't always have safety help behind him. But here's what we'll know. He's going to get tested a lot, and he's going to get tested early, and we're going to find out how improved Christian Gray is probably in the first couple weeks of the season, because that's who people are going to throw at.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is a player who is confident and isn't going to let some of the mistakes from last season sort of tear him down. I think he's using that to improve and motivate him. I think losing Watts obviously hurts, but I think in general you have the confidence in the cornerback positions that I'm not sure that changes the aggressiveness of how Chris Ash calls the defense. I think you're still at a starting point of we have a lot of confidence in what our secondary can do, and that will inform what we do with our front seven. All right, next one is from Andy Irish on the loose emoji board. Who will the starting Viper official position title by the end of September will be the starting Viper, Bobukar Traore or Jordan Botelho?
I think it's going to be a timeshare all season. I would expect, to answer your question, I would expect it to remain Bobukar Traore. I think had Jordan Botelho not had the additional rehab from a torn pec on top of a torn patellar tendon, maybe he starts out as the starter. But I think you're going to see a lot of them, and you may even see them playing together at some points in some games. Yeah. So when we do the snap counts, you're going to see very even numbers. Maybe not right now, but to your question at the end of September, yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Traore won't. If Traore isn't the answer to that, to me, he won't have met the expectations that I personally have for him. I think he's in line for a big season. Certainly, he could have done that if Botelho was healthy and Botelho was technically the starter. Botelho being healthy through the offseason and being hard to supplant there. But I agree in terms of them both playing in like pass rush situations. Like, I'd love to see both of those guys on the field, move Bryce Young inside. Like, I think there's a lot of different things Notre Dame can do with the defensive end depth that they have. And that was something Marcus Freeman spoke about on Tuesday. So, but I do think Traore will still be the starting Viper, even though I'm not sure whether or not Viper remains on the depth chart, official depth chart by the end of September would be a question, because they're technically not really playing it in the same way as they have in the past. All right, Indigo Irish on the loose emoji board said, how is Ash on in-game adjustments based on his past?
Well, the last time he was a college coordinator was 2020, and before that year, it was 2014, 2015 at Ohio State. So the game's changed a lot. I don't know that we have a good beat on that, but let me say this. Al Golden was excellent at those types of things. But I read Marcus's satisfaction with Chris Ash and the fact that Marcus hired him and that he seems very pleased with him and doesn't say, oh my gosh, I better take over the defense, leads me to believe that Marcus is confident in those areas.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a great answer for this. It just feels like one of those things that we'll find out, rather than like, I don't know how I would get an answer to this besides like trying to rewatch all the 2020 Texas games. Like, I feel like that would take a lot of time for little outcome. Texas's defense wasn't necessarily great that year. They
improved, but they weren't good enough to save the head coach's job.
Yeah, they were the 61st in scoring defense, allowing 28.5 points per game. I was looking through sort of box scores. Oklahoma State scored 24 points in the first half and then only allowed 10 points in the second half in overtime in a Texas win. So maybe that's a sign of in-game adjustments, but I didn't watch that game, so I don't know why that turnaround happened. So I think it would require a lot of guessing and a lot of research to try to get a better beat on this than what I currently have. All right, next one is from NDBSC on the loose emoji board. What is our kicking game, especially field goals, looking like this year, expectation versus last year's?
So the kicking game for the first game is going to look as follows. Noah Burnett as the place kicker, at least on field goals 50 yards and in. Marcello Diamede doing the kickoffs. He's a walk-on. And then James Rendell doing the punting. I think Notre Dame is going to be better at punter because James has adjusted to living in the United States, adjusted to the lulls in the game of maybe punting once in the first quarter and then not punting until the fourth quarter. I'm really curious about Marcello and how he'll do as kickoffs. But for him to win that job over Eric Schmidt and Burnett tells me something. Burnett, to me, is still a little bit of a mystery. I know Notre Dame fished him out of the portal, but Eric Schmidt was right there in that competition and may still be right there in that competition. So he's certainly better than an injured kicker, but I'm not sure yet that I have a lot of confidence in his accuracy.
Yeah, I don't know that the expectations, at least as it relates to Burnett and Jeter, like going into the season, are vastly different. Certainly Jeter didn't live up to that because of the injuries. He certainly made some important kicks as well, but the thing that I feel like we do know is that Burnett, at least according to Marty Biaggi, is healthier than he was last year. There was some explanation of Burnett maybe being overworked previously, and Notre Dame is very conscious of that, and so maybe that is correlates to some of the inconsistencies that Burnett had. He had 2 seasons that were inconsistent, and the middle of the season, but in between those, he was pretty accurate. So we'll see if Notre Dame can get that accuracy out of him. And I think it's important when we're talking about the kicking game that Notre Dame has to be better in terms of blocking for its field goal unit, because there were too many blocked field goals last year, and that was something that Marty Biaggi said that way they prioritized in the offseason in terms of shoring up and making sure that's not an issue. All right, next question is from @Murray O'Connell. Do you have any words of encouragement for those of us that are forced to endure another season of Jason Garrett calling games? He is literally the worst ever to call a game in the history of sports. Also, if Eric could play for any ND coach, who would it be?
Words of encouragement. The words of encouragement I would have is that Greg McElroy will be the analyst for the opening game against Miami, and he's really, really good. I haven't listened to Garrett calling too much, but I've heard complaints about him, and I'm sure people complain about me. So that's and the other thing is NBC sometimes swaps out announcing teams. They've done that for big games before, and so you get, I think, Todd Blackledge, perhaps. Which Notre Dame coach would I want to play for? There were a lot of different ones that ran through my mind, but the answer to me became obvious, and it was Era. I was fascinated with Era Parsegian when I was first introduced to college football. I grew up wanting to play for Woody Hayes, but I would want to play for Era. And I think Era also would have the good sense to keep me on the bench based on my athletic ability.
Yeah. Jason Garrett, like, I don't watch many home games. I mean, I don't watch home games from home. And then when I do rewatch them, I tend to listen on mute. It's just because I do so much rewinding and stuff. It would be like, if you think that's annoying, imagine like constantly rewinding the play and hearing him say the same thing over and over again. And that's not a commentary on Jason Garrett. That's just whoever it would be annoying. So that's why I mute that. I would, like, if you find him that annoying, just mute the game yourself and turn on the radio broadcast and try to sync those up. That would be my suggestion. I don't think he's that bad from the experiences that I've had in terms of watching him and listening to him, but I don't do it at the same frequency as fans at home. All right, Vinny Boomba on the loose emoji board says in all caps, is Burl Ives or Yoko Ono doing the national anthem?
Well, I'm assuming this is hypothetical. So for me, I guess it's who would be my preference in that. Very different styles. The one thing about it is Burl Ives had pipes. Yoko Ono to me is the musical equivalent of a quarterback throwing a pick six.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Vinny Boomba's sarcasm meter. I imagine this was just a silly question, and then we like to take silly questions and make them sillier with our answers from time to time. So I included it. Personally, hopefully we get Mr. Worldwide Pitbull singing the national anthem if you made me pick. And as far as Burl Ives is concerned, if it ain't Holly Jolly Christmas, I don't need any Burl Ives in my life. So obviously we're not getting either of those guys, but I'm not sure who will sing the national anthem. Maybe it'll be Eric. He hasn't told me what his plans are for the national anthem on Sunday night.
I've got a pinch hitter on that if I ever need a singer.
All right. Our last question is from our coworker, Mike Singer. Thoughts on Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's engagement? How did you hear the news?
Okay, so this is a step above a hard launch, Tyler. I think where I saw it was maybe a tweet from one of my coworkers. I think we tried to localize it by saying this was a former Brian Kelly player. And so that was my introduction into what was happening there. And then what do I think about it? My thought is they probably shouldn't invite Yoko Ono, who's now 92 years old, to sing at the wedding.
Mike Singer is actually the person who informed me. I just got done doing a TV spot with WSBT after the Marcus Freeman press conference on Tuesday, and I was looking at my phone, and that was one of the messages that I had received. And so I had to immediately text my girlfriend, who is a big Taylor Swift fan and Travis Kelce fan by proxy, and she is a school teacher, and so she had no idea, and then she couldn't believe it. She was fired up. So obviously it's a long running podcast conversation of my interest in Taylor Swift as an artist, and Eric has always given me a hard time about that, even asking Jack Swarbrick if he preferred Taylor Swift or Ramones.
And what was his answer?
His answer was Ramones. Yeah, I think it's cool. I've liked Taylor Swift for a long time. I think their relationship seems great from the outside. Obviously, we don't know what's going on for real, but I think it seems pretty cool, and happy for them if they have found their special person. All right, that is it for this week's episode of the Third and Gold podcast and the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce engagement breakdown. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast homes. Search for Notre Dame Football with Eric Hansen and Tyler James if you're not already subscribed to us on the proper feeds. We have plenty of written coverage over at blueandgold.com to prepare you for Sunday night. So stick with Blue and Gold for all your Notre Dame coverage needs.